Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Hope. I'm a managing director and the founder of Parquet Development, an agency that works exclusively in the Salesforce ecosphere. I am ParDreamin certified and currently handle or manage all of our agency's ParDreamin projects. Thank you for the opportunity to spend a little time with you today talking about ParDreamin. This session is Getting Sophisticated with Scoring. So for our session agenda today, we are going to go over each of these topics: default settings, decay, page and completion actions, and scoring categories. We'll discuss each of these topics as well as any important watchouts I think you should be aware of. But first, let's go over a few basics. We'll talk briefly about what a ParDot score is and why it's important. So scoring is a simple concept. It's meant to capture engagement over time. Whenever a prospect interacts with your marketing assets, whether that's a landing page, an email, or a website page view, the activity increases the prospect score, showing you that the prospect has become incrementally more engaged. A high score tends to indicate that a prospect is very engaged, whereas a low score would indicate the opposite. So in this case too, we have two examples here. One of a prospect with a very, very high score. And over here, you can kind of see a scoring breakdown. Watch as this prospect score grows with continued engagement. Why does the ParDot score matter? Well, scoring is a very effective qualification tool. To prevent your sales team from being flooded with leads that aren't ready for follow-up, you might use a prospect score as part of your lead qualification criteria. And if you track the equivalent of a life cycle stage for your prospects, you might even use their score to determine when they transition from an MQL to an SQL. So again, qualifying prospects before handing them off to sales will increase ROI, and it makes life much easier for your sales team. And so we have an example automation rule over here that shows anytime a lead score goes over 74, that's their qualification threshold for an SQL. So you can see their life cycle stage changes and the SQL date changes as well. So the default model, ParDot comes with a default model out of the box. While this configuration is well-intentioned, every organization should review and customize before relying on the score as a valuable metric. Take the opportunity to discuss this model with your team and really make it your own. Be sure to expand beyond the marketing department here. Your sales team might have very different opinions about what makes high-value content. While I'm going to share some general recommendations, no two scoring models should be exactly the same. Your team will surely value certain types of interactions differently than others. So we have here the scoring rules, default scoring rules on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'm just going to go through my general recommendations with you. Email open is the first one listed here. I personally believe that email opens are worthwhile. If I had a prospect who was opening every email that I sent them, I think I would want to see that in their score. That being said, email opens isn't the most reliable. There's a lot of things that can trigger false opens, so we don't want to rely too much on it. That being the case, I tend to increase email opens to a score 1 point adjustment on the first open only. File access, I feel, is by default too low. Most of the time when somebody's accessing a file, it's a PDF, it's an ebook, a white paper, a brochure, something that you're hosting in ParDot, and that tends to be higher value content. Again, that may not be the case for your organization, so be sure to think through each of these, but typically I think that warrants increasing. The form error, this is actually the same is true for the form error, the form handler error, and landing page error. I feel that this deduction in score is unnecessary, and I would change that to 0. In most cases, when somebody does have a form error associated with them, it's because they missed a required field. And that's usually a problem that they then correct and submit the form successfully. And then when they do, they end up with a score of 45 instead of 50 or 25 instead of 30, which can actually get in the way of some of your rules. If you have sales routing rules that are dependent on score. Opportunity scoring, I would change all of these to 0. The idea between a score is to show us how interested a prospect is in us. And that really helps the sales team qualify them when they're leads. By the time the opportunity has been created, it's a little bit irrelevant at that point. And I also don't feel that opportunity created or lost is really true to the rest of the types of engagement that are listed here. So my personal opinion is to change all opportunity scoring to 0, but again, that may not be the right fit for your organization. Social message link click, I would only increase this if you're actually using the ParDreamin social posting function. Many organizations do not, or they use an outside tool instead. If that's the case for you, you could definitely leave it at 0. But if you are using ParDreamin for the social posting, I would probably mimic the point adjustment that you have for custom redirects or tracker link click. So in this case, that would be 3. And then a note that I've added here as well is that while we do see the webinar, the options for webinar score adjustment, it's important to bear in mind that you need to be using a ParDreamin sanctioned connector to do that. So like WebEx, GoToWebinar, that kind of thing. And otherwise, there's no point in adding score adjustments there. The pro tip that I've added here is to remember that you can also adjust a prospect score upon import. So pre-COVID, it was very common for clients that I worked with to attend conferences and then come back with a list of prospects who had stopped by their booth and talked to salespeople. And when importing these prospects into ParDreamin, it did not feel right to import them with a score of 0, considering they actually had pretty high level of engagement. And so we would always be sure to adjust their score accordingly upon import. So the first watch out that I have listed here is to just remember that the changes are retroactive. In most cases, that is a good thing. If you take email open as an example, you might have started off with it as 0, especially if you started off with the default model in place, but then decided later that that didn't really make sense. And if that's the case, then going in and changing that to 1 or to 3, whatever that might be, is helpful because it forces a recalculation. And then when I look at my prospects now, that new, that new score adjustment is going to be factored in. Sometimes, however, it can interrupt or interfere with rules or completion actions or something else that you might have in place that's looking at a prospect score and triggering actions accordingly. So it's just important to kind of keep an inventory of where score is being tracked and what actions are going along with that before making any big changes. The second watch out, and this is a big one for me, is that it's important to not confuse scoring with grading. This is especially common with companies that are not using grading, but it's very important to remember that scoring and grading do 2 different things. Scoring is meant to show us how interested a prospect is in us, and grading is meant to show us how interested we should be in the prospect. So grading is really where attributes like this, what you see here, the prospect's job title, or like how large their company is, how many employees work there, those things might increase or decrease a prospect's grade, but they shouldn't interfere with the score because this is not dependent on engagement. So limit score adjustments to engagement. In my opinion, you should not build rules like this. The third watch out is to just always keep in mind that this is just the baseline, the default model. There are other mechanisms in place. Think automation rules, completion actions, and page actions that may be adjusting a prospect score up or down, and that the default model is always working in conjunction with those. And so this example that you see here, we have form completion actions on the left, where this prospect score is being adjusted by 25 points, in addition to the 50 points that they're getting from the default scoring model. So this interaction is a 75-point score adjustment. And if that's intentional, great, but if it's not, then that's problematic. So page and completion actions. The baseline model serves an important purpose, but it paints a lot of activities with a broad brush. The reality is that you can very rarely treat all forms or website pages the same way. So let's jump into that. This first example is page actions. So in our default scoring model, we might have that all page views are worth 1 point or 3 points or 5 points, just depending on how you've configured your model. But that's every page on your website is being weighted the same way. And so in this case, there are likely pages that should be weighted differently, like a pricing page is a great example. And so in this example, we can see that we do have a pricing page, and we want to make sure that when this pricing page is viewed, that an additional 10 points are awarded, again, in conjunction with whatever they're already being awarded in the default model. And we're also calling it out as a priority page. And then this is kind of an example of what that looks like when you actually see it in a prospect's record. The pro tip here is that you can also negatively adjust a prospect score for visiting certain areas of your website, and good sections are, jobs or career section where you really are getting the feeling that this person is interested in a different side of your business. Form completion actions, this is really very similar. So not all forms you create for your website should be weighted the same way. A newsletter form and a meeting request form, the two examples you see on this page, are very, very different. Newsletter sign up is super high funnel type of content. And in this case, this client is choosing to take away points from their score when they fill out a form. So remembering that maybe this person has a 25-point score increase in their default model, when the newsletter form actions take away 15, then all they're going to have left is 10 points as a result of the form submission. And in this case over here, we're looking at a piece of high value content, which might be a meeting request, a demo request, something like that. And they are in conjunction with the default model adding points for this person. So giving them an additional 25 points. The pro tip here is actually demonstrated in this example. So just making sure that you can also take away points and not only add them. So decay, what we've talked about so far is how we can increase a prospect score. But a prospect score can and should go down too. So the reason that score decay or depreciation is so important is because the score can be very misleading when the score is very high, but the last activity date is a really long time ago. And this right here is a pretty good example of that, where we see that this person was assigned in 2014. Their last interaction was 2017. But their score is 835. So if you had a salesperson who was, filtering through their lead list view by ParDreamin score, they might not be getting that other information that gives them context. And this score by itself is a very misleading number. So a high score gives your sales team the wrong idea if the prospect hasn't been active in a long time. So here's some use case examples behind score decay. You can actually see an automation rule over here on the right that takes away 10 points. You can see that it is set to repeat every 30 days and that the total matches is unlimited. And then our criteria down here is that basically they haven't done anything in the last 30 days, but that they were at one point active. If they had never been active and they hadn't been active in the last 30 days, that would not be of note that would be expected. So we want to make sure that they were active at some point, but haven't been active lately, and that their score, in this case, we're looking at anybody whose score is at least over 10, and then we're taking away 10 points. Because repeat matching is enabled, every 30 days, we're going to check to see if another 30 days have gone without activity and slowly take points away from them each time. And this right here is actually just an example of when you look at the prospect score breakdown to see how the automation is updating their score and removing points. So watchout number one is to really fine-tune your logic. Not everybody needs to be treated the same way. Seems to be kind of the theme of the day. Certain prospects, like current customers, contacts who already have opportunities associated with them, especially if those opportunities are active, it's not really necessary to first of all, to depend on their scores heavily, but secondly, to worry about decaying that score. So this example of score depreciation actually does take that into account, and they're only looking for leads in a certain status. They might have several different rules. It's unlikely that this is the only score decay rule that this client has, but each of those rules, depending on status, depending on CRM type, is probably a little bit different. And so in this case, they're actually looking at 90 days without activity and taking away 15 points if the score is over 15. So watchout number two, you've actually seen this in action in the last two examples. Why we added make sure their score is over 10, make sure their score is over 15, is because we don't want to just repeat indefinitely. The end result, as you see in this example, is that you can have a ridiculously low score, which again is also very misleading. So scoring categories, it's all well and good to know a prospect's overall score and having this help us determine when they're sales ready or what their life cycle stage might be. But how do we know where this overall score is generated from and which products or services the prospect is most interested in? Scoring categories allow us to easily determine all of the marketing assets that are used to generate leads for a particular vertical, whether that's by service type, product type, campaign type, or something else altogether. So they rely on the use of folders. When we create a scoring category, we assign it to a folder. Prospects will then earn category points on their engagement with the assets in that particular folder. Note that scoring categories, unlike the other features and tools we discussed so far, are not available in all editions of Pardot. This feature is also unavailable for Pardot accounts that have person accounts enabled. So we can actually see sort of in a silly example here of a prospect whose overall score is 925. But when we really dig in to see where most of their engagement is coming from, we can tell that they're certainly more interested in one topic than they are the others that follow. So if I were in marketing and I was going to create some cat-focused content, this person would be a good target for that type of content. And as a salesperson, even talking with this lead, I would know really where to focus on in that conversation. So it definitely gives us a lot of insight about our prospect. So here's an example of how we might use that scoring category. And this is SQL by category. So you can see here it says scoring categories make routing leads by interest a simple task. So if I wanted to make sure that all of my leads that were interested in a certain topic, product, or service went to one of my salespeople who was best qualified to deal with that particular topic, product, or service, I could do that very easily. This is an automation rule. It's pretty simple, where we see if their scoring category is a certain number, is over 100, then I want to make sure it goes to this specific user. Second example here is targeted content, and we sort of discussed this already. Scoring categories will help you better segment your audience and get the right content in front of the right people. So remembering the kitten content example, if I'm about to host a webinar about, caring for kittens, then I could build a dynamic list and I could say, show me all of my prospects whose, kitten score is over 200 or whatever. And then the watch out here for scoring categories, and it's actually our only watch out, is to just be really careful when reorganizing our content. Moving content around triggers a score recalculation, and moving content to the recycling bin removes points from the related scoring category, but not the overall score. So basically what that means is that if I have 10 emails in a certain folder that is associated with a scoring category, and then I decide to delete some of them because the branding is outdated and I don't want people to send them anymore, that actually would reduce the score of any prospects who had interacted with that content. It would reduce their score for that category, but their overall score would actually remain unchanged. So that actually takes us to the end of our presentation for today. Thank you guys very much for your time. There are several other great sessions and keynotes for you to attend, and I hope that you make those. Thank you again very much, and I hope that you learned something new today.